Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Action Items. I am Dyci Sfregola, a supply chain advisor, and I am here this month talking to you about startups and supply chain managing that risk, mitigating risk. So I'm joined here by my little one, and we are going to be joined by Sofia Herrera today. We all know that a poorly managed supply chain can quickly lead to catastrophic consequences for companies since startups are generally more vulnerable to supply chain problems than their more established counterparts, legacy companies, legacy agencies, things like that. But on the other hand, when supply chain is properly handled, it can make it easier to make a mark and beat out the competition when it comes to speed, reputation, and of course, overall customer satisfaction. So this episode, as always, is brought to you by NewGen Architects, bridging the gap between business and technology to help companies achieve successful supply chain transformation. As a thought partner and facilitator, the NGA team sets up clients with a secure foundation and layer in ownership as they embark on technology-driven transformation journeys. From tool selection to project management and business transformation road mapping, the NGA team is made up of industry change makers whose goal is to support scalable and efficient supply chain transformation. Visit newgenarchitects.com for more information to schedule a discovery session or send an email to hello@newgenarchitects.com. So let's bring Sofia up to the stage. Good morning, Sofia. How are you?
Hi, good, and you? How are you?
I'm very, very good. Good evening, Natisha. I was going to say good morning. So where are you? Is it morning, afternoon, evening for you?
Morning, 9 a.m.
Okay, cool. So, well, thank you for setting aside some time to join us this morning. So, before I get into the questions, why don't you give us a brief introduction, who you are? I know you are a self-proclaimed supply chain ambassador. We need more of those. So, give us a little bit about your background, a little bit of information.
I'm Sofia. I'm from Mexico. I live in Guadalajara. I know it's a very tough word to say in Spanish, but yeah. Well, I studied industrial engineering, and I think for the most part of my career, I was like very focused on continuous improvement in manufacturing and Lean Six Sigma. But then I discovered that there was this world of supply chain that connected everything, and I was more hi Sarah. Yeah, well, and I was more attracted, incentivized to follow that path, and that's how I started like specializing on that. In Yeah, basically I've worked in warehouse management, demand planning, and now I am in network design with HP. And yeah, I think like my self proclamation of supply chain ambassador started when I like genuinely just started sharing what I've learned every day about supply chain. And then I started meeting people like you, like Sarah Barnes, and yeah, and
And now we're
other.
here.
Yeah, and now we're here.
And now we're here. And you are, so you're doing network design optimization, which for startups is very important, for everyone, obviously, it's very important. You want to have visibility into your network and how it is connected. But you also, as a startup, want to start off on the right foot. So what we are going to be talking about today, everyone, we normally do the action items at the end. What has happened is that we get so deep into conversation, the engagement is so great from the comments that then I get that 5-minute warning and we're trying to rush to get everything wrapped up. So the high level action items that we're going to be going through talking about today that we want you to take away from this episode as a startup supply chain leader. And if you are at a larger company that kind of has a startup feel, a lot of companies are still in hyper growth. A lot of companies are looking to completely revamp their supply chain. So basically starting off, with a white space, a fresh slate. So What we are going to be talking about is developing your negotiation and problem solving skills, balancing the risk portfolio, focusing on finding the right people. Supply chain is a people industry, and then leveraging your network as it's needed. So I have a quick question for you, Sophia. You know, and you shared this with me. This is not information that I already knew. You shared with me that in 2019, startups were on the rise. And then once the pandemic hit, there was a mix of startups who grew. There was, some startups that didn't make it, unfortunately. And then there were, the mergers and acquisition side of it. What do you think the role of supply chain was in, kind of potentially being able to predict who was going to make it once the pandemic hit and there were, the shutdowns and the uncertainty. And even now, as we're still continuing to see, geopolitical changes, and, kind of things opening back up, but what is going to be the new normal? Which startups make it?
I think that being able to say which startup will make it, it's an art. And I think a lot of people do all this deep analysis of market trends and, like, yeah, exactly, geopolitical factors or economic factors that will or may not affect the growth of your startup. And I mean, sometimes they're, even though they do all those kinds of predictions, they are still wrong, right? And I think, yeah, predicting that from a supply chain point of view, I think it will be very hard or very subjective in some cases. But you might say that I think every startup starts with this idea where they detect a gap in, yeah, a gap in between something that already exists and something that should exist to make it better. And once identified, they start growing that. I think many startups have this great idea, this great business plan, but when it comes to putting in action or actually developing their supply chain, that's where I think most of them fail, and fail because they want to do everything by themselves. I think that's a start of feeling like, yeah, if we are doing it, we should do everything by ourselves. But when it comes to fulfillment or delivery, of course you cannot do it by yourself. You need to have partners. And because the scale of how you're growing will be bigger than how you are growing internally and developing those tools that you should have for that kind of part of the business.
Right. So this kind of makes me think about, I remember not right at the start of the pandemic, but maybe about 6 to 9 months in, at least from, especially from the procurement and sourcing side, there was a lot of conversation around relationships matter and
Yeah.
determining, who your strategic partners are versus transactional. Of course, every single supplier, every single partner is not going to be this heavily integrated strategic partner, but you do want to have relationships with the right people and with the right, outsourcing. Like you mentioned, as a startup, you don't want to do everything yourself, which is a good point, because even when we work with larger companies, we work with large enterprises that have co-manufacturers as well as, their own manufacturing. They're not completely vertically integrated. So it is very important. So what would you, if you were, if I was a startup owner, if you were talking to, a founder, what would you say is kind of the key points to think about when determining who our fulfillment partners should be, who our 3PL distribution partners should be? Should we do manufacturing on our own? How can, startup sit and decide as they're doing that network design and those, partner selections, what should we outsource versus what should we do internally?
Yeah, I think first you need to assess your own startup, right? Like, do I have similar other companies that are doing something kind of the same as I am doing, right? How are they doing that? Because I think sometimes we're so focused on, yeah, we should be the first, we should be the ultimate, the best, and you're so focused on yourself that you cannot see the rest of the market or the rest of your competitors, right? And yeah, so if you have other people around you that are trying to find a solution similar to what you're offering, then I'll look to them like, okay, what are they doing, and is it working or not?
Don't try to reinvent the wheel if it
Yeah,
doesn't need to be reinvented.
I mean, I think it's a bit selfish to think like you are the first one to be doing that. I think many people around, we are so many in the world, that perhaps someone has already went through that path. And I mean, it doesn't hurt to go and ask them, hey, how did you do it, or how are you doing it? I think it's also very I think it's humbling to do that, and
Mhm.
we should. But well, if your startup or your solution doesn't exist at all, then I would say like, okay,
There's
sit
still
back.
something similar.
Yeah, exactly,
There's
obviously,
still
but
something similar. Look at the market, take different industries, maybe take some different companies and, put it together.
yeah,
So
and sit back, stop and think. Because I think
exactly.
as a startup, we are, well, I think it's awesome to have that drive. Like, yeah, let's, like, because everyone is like very action oriented, very how can I say it? Yeah, like problem solving. If they say no to them, they'll be like, no, I have a yes, and we can go this way. They're very agile in the way they think. But also I think that could be a weakness in terms of, okay, if you don't stop and and do this analysis, do this market comparison with your partners, with similar kind of people that are doing things in the industry, then I think your growth will be okay. You will be growing, but perhaps you will fail in the same things that someone else has already failed.
Right, exactly. So learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the network, what are we kind of touched on this, but I definitely think that it's great to share for the audience. What are some of the resources and tools that you have found that have been really great for product-based startups? And I say that because you mention that you see sometimes, and I also see the same thing. So I don't want to just put, I don't want to say you said it. I see the exact same thing with a lot of startups, is
Yeah.
that, they get their investments, they have a great product, they are looking at sales and product market fit and pricing and how are we going to drive revenue and how are we going to, sign that distribution deal with the big box retailers? And then they sign the deal, and now everyone's like, oh, well, how do we actually fulfill the orders? How do we actually get the orders to the customers? The operational execution side of it is very often an afterthought. So
Hmm.
for founders that don't have that network to be able to leverage the knowledge, and they don't really understand how product operations work, what are some of the resources that you have found to be, kind of robust and actually helpful that people can go, start looking at now?
Yeah, well, I think for funding and also for searching for those kind of partners, I have found Startup Grind.
Mhm.
It's a group of people. It's a community that was founded by Google, and I think there are several chapters around different cities across the world. And those those guys also do like conferences of how can we fund like new startups, but also like they have this like symposium of share of other people that have already made it, and they share what they do, right? And I think those kind of events, those kinds of communities are very helpful for startups, as yeah, as a resource of finding and learning about that operational side, right? I think perhaps this resource is a bit more into yeah, like technology based startups. But I think reaching out to communities as such as ASEM or CSEM, what CSEMP, yeah, ISEA, those communities are a great resource. And I think for the operational part, I think there are a lot of already like already grown startups in logistics and in operations that you can directly reach out, and that they will be eager to help you on that part. I
Yes.
think that
So
that's
so
the
kind of
beauty
like
of
finding peers.
exactly. But I
Yes.
think that's the beauty of how supply chain got the spotlight during the pandemic, because all those yes, all those companies that started as a solution, like solution for logistics provider or for warehousing, have already like boomed,
Mhm.
and they will be they're searching for more partners, or well, searching at, for in this case, for clients.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So maybe looking at, if you're looking at startup grind, I'm personally involved with Techstars. So
Hmm.
I'm a mentor for a Techstars startup, and as you mentioned, they are digital first and technology startups. But many of them have a product side to it,
Yeah.
and a lot of what we are talking about is how to leverage the operational side for scale. And then I like what you talked about of, the not necessarily always going to those sorts of networks and organizations to find funding, but also to find the right people. So, building out your team, but also building out, who your potential partners can be. And you mentioned CSCMP, you mentioned ASCM, and all of the different fulfillment, warehousing, logistics, transportation startups that are, coming up in their time as well. So how do
Yeah.
we partner together to, make sure that we all grow? So I want to give a big shout out. Rob Johnson, you're always here. Thanks for getting up early in California and joining us. We've got people from all over. England, Mozambique, Panama, Samuel, Joaquim, Mashoud, thank you for joining everyone. Ahmed, thank you, thank you. And everyone who doesn't know about the global S&OP community, definitely check that out on LinkedIn. Thanks for showing some love here with us. So when we're talking about partnerships, when we're talking about finding those partners, I talked to a CEO who was appreciative of the thought that I said, or the fact that I said, let's get creative. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yes, you're CPG. Yes, you're frozen goods, but we can't necessarily look at what General Mills and Nestle is doing, because you don't have that footprint. You don't have that buying power. So when it comes to negotiation skills, as
Yeah.
startups are going out and looking for these partners and things like that, you're a little fish in a big pond of everyone who also needs warehousing space. Everyone also
Yeah.
needs containers. Everyone else also needs everything to keep their supply chains moving. So, what are some negotiation tips that, startups can leverage so that they, are not ruled by fear to say, I'm not even going to try because who am I? Or, okay, I'm going to try to get the best out of this situation as well.
Well, again, I think it comes to start knowing the right people, right? And start like leaving your, so you want everyone to have like on the top of your mind the name of your company, right? Or whatever you're doing. So I think exposure is very important. So
Okay.
even though if you're very small, even though if you're like, I don't know, in a very, very small place in the world, I think at least for now, we can get connected on online at least, right? So I think managing the footprint of your company online could be a good leverage for getting your name out there. But also, yeah, building relationships, right? And I think at the end of the day, also everyone will be trying to sell you something, and it's not necessarily something that you need for your startup, or that your startup is at the point that they could actually implement it, right? So also beware of, okay, if you met someone that provides you with a solution, um, and you're already like asking for, like, yeah, like a quotation or a proposal or something, make sure that actually that, not because they say yes to you, you're not like committed to say yes to them as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, as make sure that what they're offering will actually help you, right?
Right.
Don't be blinded by the,
The
like, the
fancy
glowing,
buzzwords. Yes.
yeah, or also by the light of the yes that they told you, right?
Right. Yes. And
They
that's
will.
something that we really push with our clients also is not what do you want. It's great to think that in 18 months or in 2 years or in 3 years we are going to need this service or
Yeah,
we are going to need this technology, but right now, what do you actually need, not what do you want today. And that can also help with overspending. You know what I mean?
exactly.
In startup world, it's always, and I find this, obviously starting, my company, and the team and I sit down. There are moments where we're like drowning, and we're like, oh my goodness, we must go buy this thing because we feel so much pain right now. But we have to take a step back and say, but are we feeling this pain because this is startup world, and sometimes that's just how it is, and it's
Yeah,
temporary, so we just have to get through the storm? Or is this something that we're expecting to continue? So then we have to sit down and kind of take a beat and say, okay, before we go
exactly.
sign this contract, is this a long-term need? Or are we just needing a band-aid? Or we just have to suck it up and put our big girl, undies on, and that's just what we have to get through. So one of the pieces of advice and one of the approaches that we take when we're working with people to have these conversations to say, what do you actually need right now? Or what should be done first? Because, when you're talking to larger organizations that are established, they have budgets. And
Yeah.
those budgets are even more constrained when you get to, the small startup level. And you need to understand, yes, I need a great customer service platform, because we know, you and I know, the supply chain ambassadors of the world know that if you want to not only gain a competitive advantage in today's market, but to survive in today's market, there are certain expectations that consumers are going to have, and they're going to buy from the companies that can give them a delivery estimate and meet that delivery estimate. They're going to want to buy from people who have their products in stock, that they don't have
Mm-hmm.
to wait for weeks to get, the next product. They're going to want subscriptions because it's easier to manage. It's one less thing to think about when your attention is being pulled in many different directions. So we always sit down and we say, what is the goal? What is the strategic objective for the next 6 months, 18 months, 24 months, whatever that looks like? And then we say, based off of that, start with inventory management.
This.
Based off of that, start with fulfillment. Based off of that, start with demand planning. Build out this team, then that team. You can do anything, but you can't do everything, at the same
Exactly.
time. So is there anything that you would add on to that, or any other, kind of golden nuggets that you would tell startup founders to think about?
Yeah, I think just going around what you last said about you can't do everything. Yeah, you need to choose small bits, right? At one bit at a time, and be patient. I know patience is not something startup founders have like internally. I think they develop it through time. I think they're very resilient, but patience is different, right? Resilience is like, okay, they say no to me several times and I don't care. But patience is, okay, if I can't have it now,
What do I do in the meantime?
What do I do in the meantime, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it will be just that, like, to be patient and trust the planning. I think no one trusts planning. They are like, okay, let's don't plan and just act, right?
Okay.
Because
What
that's
does a
what
good
we
plan
need now.
look like? Because maybe,
Yeah,
there's also always the world where people don't trust the plan because
exactly.
they don't
Because it
have
fails.
confidence in the, you know what I mean? It's like, well, how did we come up with this plan? Well, I pulled
Yeah,
it out of the sky. So you kind of you talked about earlier the market analysis, but what in your mind, especially from being a supply chain planner and from being on the operations side, what makes a good plan? Because like we talked about, a lot of startups are like, oh, we're going to drive this much revenue, we're going to sell, if we want to make $100,000, we've got to sell X number of units at X dollar price point.
yeah,
And we're going to do marketing, we're going to do social, we're going to do digital ads, we're going to do all of these different things. But we talked about how the operational side is then lost in that plan. Startups are in a unique position to actually build out the foundations of a real sales and operations planning process or integrated
correct.
business planning process. So at a startup level, what do you think are the key, the fruit of an operational plan that you can then say, I buy into this? This is a good plan. Is it the demand planning? Is it the inventory? Is it fulfillment and distribution? Going back to, you can, focus on just small pieces because you can't do everything when you have a
Yeah,
limited, number of resources. What would you focus on? And of course, there's no hard, fast, rule, but from your
yeah, I know.
perspective, yeah,
I
not
think,
putting you on the spot so that anyone whose startup now fails will not come back to
yeah,
Sofia
they'll be like, hey,
and
she said
say,
inventory first. And I
right,
focused on that and it didn't work. No, I
right,
think I'll do a more general approach and not focus on which area to start first. But I think despite of the area you want to start first, that will be like based on your priorities and, as you mentioned, what you need to do first, then you'll decide which area to focus on. But for a plan to be a good plan, first you need to know what are your success criteria or your measurements of what are the metrics that you're going to measure that will tell you if you fail or don't fail, right?
right.
What, and also, from where am I going to get the data for those metrics, right? And is this data um, good or bad? Should I start focusing on how do I retrieve this information and actually then use it, right? So that's one part. And the other is that I think a plan is never good when you're very optimistic. Perhaps I'm a very realistic person, but I think that's what I've seen, right? When you're very optimistic, most of the time you fail.
Mhm.
So I always will do like a good thing for planning is also scenarios, right? So you have A, B, C, D, I don't know, or just like a
We do
very
medium, you
optimist.
do medium, low, high, and then expected.
Yeah, exactly. But one of those scenarios should actually take like the latest thing you've seen in the performance or the behavior of whatever you're doing, right? Because if you don't acknowledge that part, then you'll be like, okay, yeah, I planned, but with 2 week history,
Right.
like week, yeah, 2 week history, and I'm not seeing what I'm living in this moment, right?
That
And
makes sense.
perhaps, and I think in this very uncertain and volatile world, it's very important to see, okay, I'm planning with the past, but what am I living now, right?
Right, exactly. So where does the balancing and the mitigation of the risk come in? Because when I
Yeah,
think about, risk planning, it is, we talked about a couple of episodes with bio of visibility to the network and making sure that you have an understanding of who your first, second, third tier suppliers are.
Yeah.
As a startup, it's very easy to say we have one supplier, I know who it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there are also other pieces that you want to consider when you're balancing the risk. And startups can't always necessarily say, I know that Georgia Pacific, huge company in the Southeast, 18 months ago was stocking up on inventory, even over the holidays, when people were expecting for the holiday demand surge, and they were stocking up on inventory. That requires a lot of money, and
Yeah.
startups don't necessarily have that. So how do they balance that when that inventory risk of stock outs, but also anything else? What would you say are kind of points to remember?
Yeah, I think, how's the saying in English? Like, don't put all your eggs in one
In one
basket.
basket? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was kind of translating the one in Spanish, and I was like, no, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. But yeah, okay. That's one thing, right? I think sometimes, yes, you start with one supplier, but I think for sure you shouldn't stay with just one supplier.
So
But
right off the gate, have some
yeah,
sort of strategic
at least
sourcing
two.
to
At
say
least two.
have at least two suppliers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think especially now, and also I think, okay, yes, you do know your first year suppliers, but yes, make a deep dive into it, right?
Mhm.
Do they have any other suppliers that I don't know of that might fail them, and then, like, because of how the pieces are will fall, yeah, it will
Right. How the
also
cookie
hit me,
crumbles.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You wanna-
I'm so bad at phrases, right?
Yeah, all of the I don't even
Yeah.
know what they're called. They're not metaphors. Are they idioms, or
Yeah,
no,
I
I
we
should
should
know this.
look
I
that
used to
up.
teach
Or if
English.
someone knows, please send us in the in the chat.
Yeah, in the chat. I used to know what all the term
Yeah.
was. I used to teach English, and I feel bad now that I don't remember. But we're on the same page. I it's there science has shown that bilingual and multilingual brains are a little bit different. So we know what we're
Very
trying
a
to
bit
say.
weird, a bit weird. But yeah.
It's your fault that you don't know what's in my brain.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so we want to make sure that even as a startup, you are not just going to the first. And what I like to do, I have a rule of thumb to do at least 3 quotes, to at
Yeah.
least talk to 3 different companies. And some companies don't do that because it is time consuming, to go through the questions and, ask everything again. And then analyze what those answers are, and who's going to be the best fit for what you are trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
Um, what what would you say to that? Just suck it up and do it. That's what I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but yeah, I would say, yeah. And another thing I think is, I think when you're talking to angel investors, or yeah, like the biggest stakeholders of your company, I think it is important to discuss to them, okay, if we fail, like, uh here's the backup plan if we fail, right? Or what we will do to, like, go, like, get back to life again and start over.
How do we
But
resuscitate the business?
yeah, we would how do we do that? But yeah, but especially, like, okay, are you in with us? Are you actually with Will you stay with us
Mhm.
if this happens? Because I know many startups that, yeah, they receive the funding, and then it's very sad when they do something wrong and they're like, no, I'm taking my money out.
Right.
Okay. But I think for a stakeholder to not take their money out when something's wrong, you should be able to give them a peace of mind, like, okay, if we fail, we will do this.
Mhm.
and this is what how we will make it better,
Right.
right? And let me know how can I make you feel more secure with us, even though we might fail, right? But I think that that's something it should be discussed up front. And sometimes it's like covered, not hey, don't tell them how are we going to fail, or because then they'll not give us the money. And
It goes back to relationships and transparency, and it's a the investors believe in you. You know, they are investing because they think they're going to see a return on investment,
yeah,
and you also have, you know, something that you're providing to them. I think it's important for the startups, and this kind of goes back to negotiation skills also, and being confident in what your product is. You've done so much research, you've done so much market analysis that you know what you're going to bring. And it is not a world where you're saying, oh, thank you so much, angel investor, for saving us.
yeah,
You're
exactly,
obviously bringing some value to them also. So be confident in that up front and saying, look, this is the world that we live in. And we have to really improve the operational side. We have to really understand and set a good foundation for our product operations if we are going to grow and scale this company. What that means is that we need to make investments. We will try different things that might not always work, but we
exactly,
also recognize that we cannot just look at our freight. We cannot just look at our systems. We can not only look at transportation and fulfillment. Those are not just costs. Those are things that, if done well, are going to drive customer loyalty, and they're going to improve the customer experience. And in the long run, our supply chain is a revenue center. It's going to drive profit. It's going to drive revenue. It's not just a cost.
correct,
So I think a lot of that, you know, if I'm talking to a startup owner, I'm going to tell them, you know, understand what supply chain and product operations really is, and take that to the table, to your investors, to your VCs. And at some point, you might even have to explain to them why it's important. Because again, everyone's focused on sales, everyone's focused on,
exactly,
you know, the other side of it. And if you don't understand why it's important, you can't then communicate and tell that story of why you should stick with me and not take the money out, because this is the new world. This is what we have to do in order to, again, not get a competitive advantage, but just to survive.
exactly. Yeah, I agree. I think I mentioned uh, well, I think many of you have read it already, the book of Originals by Adam Grant.
I
But he has
actually have
this.
not read it, and I had
Oh,
not
you
even heard
should.
about it until you shared it with me. Coming up
Okay,
with
because
original ideas, right?
exactly. But also, like, I think there's several chapters that you can read them even if you're not into entrepreneurship, or but also if you have like this drive of being different, or like if you're always the guy on the meetings that does ask questions, does I don't know, additional work. I don't know, if you're that guy, then you should read this book or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, but yeah, I think the first two chapters focus on startups and entrepreneurship. And he mentions like this approach of this guy that was pitching his startup, but he pitched it like, okay, here are all the things, all the reasons why we will fail. And everyone was like, what, why did you do that? Like, you should start with the good stuff, right? The things that will go right and how you will make it right. But when he did that, it was like also like presenting already his risk assessment and say, okay, I already checked that the things that might not
Right.
work,
The
but this
the
is
pragmatism with the optimism, because I remember you
exactly,
said that, you know, you can be too optimistic, and then it just all goes south from there.
exactly. But I think it is a good book to like learn how to voice out your ideas, how to make more ideas. And I think for people that are thinking of or are in the journey of startups can read and should be a good book for.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, we just got our 5-minute warning. So
Oh,
let's make sure that we provide the action items and the wrap up that everyone can take away now. Again, if you're a startup, absolutely. But if you are also in a place where you are experiencing hyper growth and you are really completely transforming your supply chain, a lot of these are going to be, action items that you want to run with as well. So
exactly.
you want to make sure that you develop your negotiation and problem solving skills. And I think that, like I mentioned, a lot of that stands from being confident in what you also bring to the table, recognizing that, it's a partnership, that you're giving something, but you're also getting something. So understanding what that looks like. So, focus on developing those negotiation skills as a startup founder, with the first couple of people on your team, as you're going out and looking for investors, as you're going out and looking for partners, even as you're hiring, your new team members, you want to be able to make sure that you have those negotiation and problem solving skills. And then we talked about creating a balanced risk portfolio. And that means making sure that right out the gate, you are looking at different suppliers. You don't just have one supplier, especially for, any key components. You don't want to have just one person that you are counting on, and then they end up not being able to be there for you. And then focus on finding the right people and leveraging your network. And that means finding the right people to help scale and grow the team. That means joining the different, Sofia and I are biased to, supply chain organizations, ASCM, CSCMP, and creating a network there, building relationships, leveraging the information and the experience of your peers that you find in those sorts of groups, and leveraging the network that you can find in organizations like Startup Grind, like Techstars, Y Combinator, other startup accelerators, Google I've seen, Microsoft I've seen. There are so many different ones right now,
Yeah.
and leveraging the relationships that you can build in those different organizations. So I thank you for your time, Sofia. I thank you
Yeah.
for your nuggets of wisdom. I look to see how things start to develop at HP for you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's a completely different world. We just talked about startups and balancing risk, and you're like, yeah, I'm at HP.
I mean, HP right now is also rebuilding their supply chain,
Right. Mm-hmm.
which is very interesting. And I think that, yeah, you'll be seeing very different things. And I think for many years it worked, but now they're facing like, okay, how can we make it work better and also more sustainably? And I think that's a key point. And it's something you'll be seeing, and there are a lot of exciting projects there that I'm still wrapping
Right.
my mind around. But yeah, I
That's
think
exciting. It's good to hear that. I love to see IBM and, a lot of the larger organizations talking about sustainability, because then we know that it will trickle down, to
yeah,
all
for
of the
sure.
other organizations and different size companies. And we know that supply chain, procurement, manufacturing, distribution can all be and should be at the forefront of sustainability and circularity. But we will leave that for another episode.
Yeah, yeah,
So
we should.
thanks for joining everyone from everywhere where you joined. If you want to see this again and go back, we have a recording available. You'll be able to catch it on YouTube, LinkedIn as well. Our next episode is going to be April 8th. I look forward to seeing you there, and then every second Friday of the month after that at 10 a.m. Eastern. All right, everyone, have a
Perfect.
good weekend. Thank you for joining, and we will see you next time.
Bye.